A very good morning, children. Welcome back to the English online class. Children, in today's online session, we are going to start with a new chapter from your New Voices book, that is chapter number 11, The Next Voice You Hear, which is written by George Sumner LB. So, children, first let us begin with the introduction of this lesson. The theme of this story is peace and harmony, with very strong anti war undertones. One evening, people hear a voice over the radio. It identifies itself as the voice of God, though people don't believe it at first. The next time God addresses the world, miracles begin to take place on the earth. The voice announces that it had to perform miracles so that people will actually believe it is God who is talking to them, and so they will start appreciating the small miracles that takes place on the regular basis in their lives. God's intent in doing all this is to pass on his message of peace and love to human beings. He wanted to show humans how to love one another and save the planet and themselves from destruction. So children, this was the introduction of the lesson. Now let us begin with the reading portion of the chapter. But before that, let's talk about the author, George Sumner LB, who was born on 1905 and died in 1964. He wrote a number of novels, including Girl on the Beach, Three Young Kings, and By the Sea. He had started writing short stories at the age of 12. One, The Next Voice You Hear, appeared in Cosmopolitan in 1948 and was adapted into a Metro Golden Mare motion picture, released under the same title in 1950. So children, let's begin with the reading portion. At exactly 9:38 p.m. on the first Monday in March, the strange, majestic voice was first heard over the airwaves. Just why that day and hour were chosen, nobody can say. In any event, the immediate reaction was disbelief. People simply could not believe their own ears. Floyd Uffelman of Doylestown, USA, was down in the cellar playing with his son Lyman's electric train and following a quiz program on his portable radio. Suddenly, the program faded out and the voice, deep, gentle, benevolent, but firm, said, "This is God. I am sorry. I must interrupt you. A plan of creation ought by rights to go forward under its own rules. But you, dear children of the sun's third planet, are so near to destroying yourselves. I must step in. I shall spend this week with you." Floyd stood for a moment, gaping. I am sure Lemons set up a microphone in his room. He climbed to his son's room. Lemon was sitting with one foot in his hand, agonizing over arithmetic problems. What did you do to the radio? Demanded his father. Me? Nothing. Is it broken? The boy asked. Floyd was deeply puzzled. He went next door to his neighbor, Ginny Huckle. Ginny, Floyd said, were you listening to the quiz show just now? No, answered Ginny. Lux Radio Theatre. Then I guess you wouldn't have heard it, Floyd said. Say, did you hear it too? Asked Ginny in astonishment. Wasn't that most peculiar? Doylestown was not the only town that felt wonderment. By the morning, the news reports from Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, and Australia were in, and it was public knowledge that the broadcast had been worldwide and multilingual. Arabs heard the announcement in Arabic and South African tribesmen in Shironga dialect. What do you think of it? One man would ask another. Never were the humble words, I don't know, spoken oftener than that first Tuesday in March. The sun went down. By 8, the emitters in the power stations were registering increased loads. Nor were listeners disappointed. Exactly at 9:38 p.m., the serene, friendly voice spoke again. Do not be afraid. I only want to convince you that I am God, and that I am visiting you this week. This time, direction finders attempted, by means of radio signals, to identify its position, while the voice was on the air. But no sign of trickery was discovered. On Wednesday, the newspapers devoted page after page to the voice. The unanimous view of those scientists who could be reached for comment, some of them seemed to be hiding, was that the voice was a man's. If it were actually God speaking, pointed out a professor of logic, he would not find it necessary to use the radio. Ministers of the gospel were more reserved in their statements. Even if the voice be not the Lord's, said an Anglican bishop, it reminds us of something too many of us forget. God is here with us. Wednesday evening prayer meetings across the United States were enthusiastically attended. Most churches had installed radios. The third utterance consisted of only three words: to the in indignation of those who believed God must be somber and funereal. The words were delivered with a fatherly chuckle. They were, "It is I." Like the others, the third message somehow crept into the coils and condensers of every radio transmitter in operation, it including those of ships at sea that were designed for code and did not have microphones. This suggested a possible answer to why God was using the radio. A pronouncement out of the empty sky might have caused panic, but people were used to hearing voices on the radio. The Lord was being considerate. His knowledge of human psychology was superb. This is not surprising when one comes to think of it. The very brevity of his "It is I" message went far towards convincing those who had a liking for modesty and understatement. On Thursday, another device was employed: a display of miracles for the ignorant and the superstitious. Miracles occurred about 80 kilometers apart all around the globe. Most were modest affairs: oranges in a street market in Wisconsin rolled up the wall and spelled out the words, "Men are my sons, and therefore brothers," in a pretty frame of parsley. A lion in the Copenhagen Zoo got out of his cage, strolled into the countryside until he spied some sheep in a field, and deliberately lay down with them. In Pasadena, California, a nervous woman whose husband gritted his teeth in bed leapt from the Arroyo Seco bridge. She remained suspended in mid-air for 45 minutes until a fire engine thrust an extension ladder up to her. The Lord's Thursday evening broadcast lengthy and had a theological tone. Every pebble beneath your feet, every drop of water is a miracle. But since you have lost your ability to feel, or I have had to perform today these other miracles, which require a suspension of natural law by willingness to break the law, should show you how deeply I love you. For even an omnipotent deity must limit his own powers. However, this will not convince the diehards. Hence, on the morrow, Friday, I shall perform several sizable miracles during the forenoon, and promptly at noon I shall sink the continent of Australia beneath the sea for 1 minute. After the Thursday evening broadcast, disbelief melted away. People by the tens of millions became certain that the voice was God's. Virtually the entire Muslim world was trudging the roads towards Mecca. Firecrackers rattled day and night in the yellow dust of China. Members of a little known sect in the mountains of South American Ozark wrapped themselves in sheets and gathered on a hilltop to await the imminent end of the world. Then the Australian radio stations took over the air. God had chosen the right continent for his final demonstration. People of another country might have put on a craven scramble for rowboats. Not the Australians. The good humored Melbourne announcers observed, "Nobody's nervous or alarmed. The general attitude is that a minute under water can do nobody any harm and may do some of our citizens a lot of good." Arrangements were made from Blims to circle over Melbourne and Sydney and transmit eyewitness accounts of great flood too. God had promised sizable miracles for Friday forenoon, and they were quite sizable. In the US, every last bit of metal owned by the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force was gone from its accustomed place. The whole huge tonnage of it, from buckles to battleships, was neatly cut up into scrap. By mid morning, the other nation, whose war potential was feared by the world, had also lost all its military equipment. All of the shining rows of Russian tanks, planes, and siege guns were gone. In their place stood rank upon rank of manure carts, each bearing a neat placard with a quotation from Lenin: "Peace, bread, and the land." As for the protest meeting of the atheists in New York, barely had the group of demonstrators marched into Times Square, then God turned every one of them into an angel, arced sweeping wings into feathers of purest white grew abruptly out of their shoulder blades, and over their heads appeared halos of bright gold. They had a frightfully embarrassing time trying to sneak away in taxis. The announcers and reporters flying over Australia grew almost incoherent with tension as the second hands of their watches swept away 11:58, 11:59, and finally the dot of noon. The BBC man chatted along as coolly as if he were describing a cricket match. As predicted, he said, the continent is now sinking. The rate is quite rapid, about that of a modern passenger lift. There, the last church steeple has disappeared. The water is swirled with floating objects. What a clutter people do keep about their houses. Now the hilltops are under 50 seconds. 55. Yes, she is popping up again. Right up she comes. Good old Australia, none the worse for her little drenching. Landing crafts raced for the shore the instant there was a shore to race for. The first citizen to be reached by an announcer carrying a portable transmitter was a certain Colonel Humphrey Arbuthnot, DSC, retired. Tell the radio audience, sir, panted the announcer. Did you really go under? I'm dripping, aren't I? Trumpeted the colonel. Beastly, ocean poured right into the room. I say, you wouldn't have a dry towel, would you? God's broadcast of Friday evening was devoted to picking up loose ends. Must my visit mean that the world is coming to an end? For heaven's sake, listen to your soul. Do as it bids you. Good night. Saturday was a busy, busy day. Consciences long buried were sending up tender. Green stalks like tulip bulbs. The dictators of half a dozen countries resigned. An international banking cartel went out of the business because its directors felt that their methods, never too admirable, had become unwelcome, if not obsolete. Small businessmen by the hundreds of thousands experienced a similar change of heart. One garage owner called his mechanics together and said, from now on, when we change a customer for a new distributor coil, let us actually put in the coil. Lesser malefactors spent Saturday returning stolen books to public libraries, repaying old loans, sending gifts to forgotten aunts in old ladies' homes, and so on. For 99% of the human race, it was astounding what a happy, friendly, pleasant place the earth had become by Saturday night. The Lord's Saturday evening broadcast was his farewell. Across the world, the radio hummed. Then there came silence and the beautiful voice. It said, "Now I shall take my leave. You will find that most of your problems remain. You still have pain and unhappiness. You still need to feed and to clothe and to govern yourself. Need I tell you why? A planet is a school. Live, dear children, and learn. And now, until we meet again, goodbye. On the seventh day, we presume he rested." Now, children, let us see the value points of this chapter. You can even note down this in your rough notebook. The first one is the story deals with a serious topic humorously by using a cynical and funny creator who, in a desperate last-ditch attempt to save the world, chooses a voice to reach all people on earth. Second is the theme of the story is peace and harmony with very strong anti-war undertones. One evening, people hear a voice over the radio. It identifies itself as the voice of God. The fourth value point is, though people don't believe it at first, the next time God addresses the world. The fifth one is, miracles begin to take place on the earth. The sixth one is, the voice announces that it had to perform miracles so that people will actually believe that it is God who is talking to them, and so that they will start appreciating the small miracles that take place on a regular basis in their lives. The seventh one is, God's intent in doing all this is to pass on his message of peace and love to humans, so that we do not destroy the world altogether and go on to lead their lives as better human beings. The eighth and the last value point of this chapter is, he is the God. So he wants to show humans how to love one another and save the planet and themselves from destruction. So children, this was the chapter 11, the next voice you hear. I hope that you all have understood it. Now let us see a question from the chapter with reference to the context. A statement is given here from the chapter, that is, Doylestown was not the only town that felt wonderment. Now, based on this context, 3 questions are asked. So let us see to the questions and also the answer. The first one is, what wonderment did Doylestown experience? The answer is, Doylestown experienced some magical moments. There was God speaking over the radio. The second question is, what happened in the other parts of the world? The answer is, other parts of the world had heard the same broadcast by God over the radio. The third one is, what was the common reaction to the wonderment? So the answer is, everyone was left wondering. So children, that was all for today's session. I hope that you all have understood the chapter. Thank you.